Hi everyone, welcome to a Square Circle podcast, a community for startup and scale-up people. I'm Mario Rivas, founder, CEO, board and business advisor. It's great to have you with us today. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Tiffany.
Thanks, Mario. Hi, everyone. I'm a HR executive, board advisor. And for the topic of today, happy to share I'm also a mother of a 2-year-old daughter, and I am in my 40s. So really excited to have this conversation with Jordan Abdi and everything that his company does in supporting older mothers.
I'm delighted to introduce Jordan Abdi, a physician, founder, and operator with experience across the NHS and the health, including roles at Hallmark and Picnic Health. He also brings strong governance credentials as a governor at Guy's and St. Thomas NHS Foundation Trust. He's a Schwarzman scholar, spending 1 year in Beijing, and an active voice in women's health and biotech. He's now the CEO of U-Ploid, a company focused on helping women extend and expand their reproductive window.
Thanks, Jordan. Look, it's great to meet you and really excited to learn more about you. Just to start with, do you want to share a little bit about your personal journey? How have you found yourself now into this position of CEO?
Yes, well, first, thank you, Tiffany and Mary, for having me. I think my journey has really been anchored and centered always on improving human health. It's what motivated me to go to medical school. It's what I trained for, and it's what I've done ever since. And I think when I think back to my days at medical school, and I briefly practiced in the NHS, really there's two things that occurred to me. The first is, I think healthcare systems today have become phenomenally well at delivering high quality care in the context of a sickness burden that comes with older populations. And the second thing is, within the context of delivering healthcare, ultimately you're going to be capped at the amount of that human health you can improve. And that was something that always frustrated me. I think I had attempts at entrepreneurship at medical school to find ways that actually can we do things at scale and start to level up and improve healthcare access and quality, particularly around prevention, not so successful ventures. But that was kind of always what's been at my core. And everything I've done since practice kind of centered on what we can do to better improve healthcare population. I kind of moved on from practice, went to China, as Mary pointed out. Sadly, didn't make the whole year. COVID came, killed the Chinese dream. I'm very bullish on the Chinese system. I think insofar as I can go on about this, I mean, China has a very, very different healthcare system and a very, very different healthcare ethos. Western medicine is now mainstream in China, but Chinese traditional medicine remains a core part of at least thinking, and it's centered on prevention. And the idea that you see the same doctor twice is not something people like, because it means that they failed to treat the first time. And it has created this entire healthcare culture and this now internet hospital phenomenon where prevention is really central of their healthcare system, which has enabled in part a very, very exciting biotech ecosystem in China, which was my ambition to play a more material role in. But alas, the world changed, and I came back to the UK. Found myself working at a couple of very exciting companies, mostly focused around real-world data in populations where there's significant unmet need. And I was drawn to both of those companies in Hallmark and then Picnic Health, psychiatry and rare disease respectively, because actually it's those opportunities where you can tackle challenges that patients face, where actually at present there's not much by way of opportunity to improve outcomes. That excited me, and what eventually led me into a reproductive care almost by accident. Really, I was, I think, like many people who don't directly going through their own journey, largely unaware of just how vast the unmet need is, and just how, frankly, substandard and limited innovation that we've seen in the past, 50 years in reproductive medicine. When you compare it to spaces like oncology or neuroscience, or even some rare diseases. So that's kind of my journey into the space. Happy to talk more about exactly how I came across reproductive health. I'm sure we'll get into that. But at the core and the golden thread throughout my career so far has been, what can we do to improve healthcare, and particularly what can we do to prevent bad outcomes, because ultimately that's what everyone is looking for from their own health.
Absolutely. And so when you're, this is amazing, the Chinese hospital system, there's a lot of criticisms on NHS. I'm sort of thinking as you've shared those correlations. Coming from Australia, we have a pretty strong preventative healthcare model as well. And I noticed that difference coming over here also. I'd say that UK, we're probably a little bit more advanced in talking about preventative health, about the longer lead decisions you can make today that can have an impact, 10, 20 years down the track, more so than certainly the time I've spent in the US as well. You really see that is a treating the symptoms environment as opposed to where we sit in the rest of the world. Entrepreneurial thinking you've had on this, is it that you're reaching out, is U-Ploid focused on speaking with people, on every stage of their reproductive health journey? Is it focused on people in a certain demographic? Like, how did you set up your business strategy and structure, to meet that need?
Yeah, so fundamentally, U-Ploid is positioned, and we want to be the de facto reproductive health therapeutics company. I think there's so much opportunity to tackle many of the major bottlenecks that people run into in their fertility journey, both male and female challenges, and at present are just unserved. At present, there's just very little by way of actual means and mechanisms to actually change biological realities. At present, what we're seeing is a dramatic and almost near universal phenomenon globally, where people are deciding to have children later for lots of reasons. And in different cultures, those reasons are different. And that social reality now bumping up against some biological boundaries that as a society we've not really actually tackled. And our lead program, it's called Livanta. It's our kind of first foray into the market, looking really to tackle egg quality, and specifically egg quality decline with maternal age. And as that is the number one driver of poor IVF outcomes, responsible for well over 80% of IVF failure. And that if we can tackle this major bottleneck, almost opens up for us a market opportunity to position ourselves as leaders in the rest of the domains. And there are several ideas and things we're working on in the background to tackle other major bottlenecks, but I can tell you that certainly today and for the near future, our focus is solely focused on Livanta and what we can do to bring this product to patients and ultimately help people build families when they're ready.
Is your business design around this, is it on reaching individual patients or is it reaching hospitals or fertility clinics? And how did you decide which direction to take in that?
Yeah, so we really, when we're working in biotech and developing treatments that will ultimately go into patients and potentially involved in pregnancy and babies, you're really bumping up against two very real realities that you have to confront. The first is safety. And you cannot compromise on safety or the regulatory frameworks in which you're going to be able to bring this product to market. It's essential for patient trust, it's essential for clinician trust, it's essential that you're bringing something that actually adds value to patient journeys and their experience. The second reality that you have to confront is the market. And when you're building something that you're many years away from delivering, you have to kind of work within the confines of what people will pay for and what people will be interested in accessing. And so really for that reason, on those two reasons, we took the approach that we want to work within the world of IVF. There are lots of advantages that enable us to kind of develop a safer, more accessible product through an IVF channel, as well as working within an established market where we're not having to convince the world to change how fertility care is delivered. And it offers us really a neat and opportunistic means to work with a community that does actually want to see more innovation in fertility. That's one thing I'd say I'm most impressed by since moving into reproductive health is the universal ambition everyone we meet in the sector who wants to see better access and better quality care for their patients. Kind of working within the system has made it very easy. And so that's the very approach we've taken with Livanta. It's developed and designed to be incorporated into IVF. So we directly administer this treatment into egg cells, ex vivo. So we, as part of IVF, after the eggs are retrieved, we treat and fertilize. And that kind of offers us a means to develop a lot of data early on in our program to think about the regulatory side of what we're doing, whilst also ensuring that we're working within a model that we can have conviction around the market and then the business sustainability of what we're developing. Because of course, this is very expensive to develop new treatments, and ultimately you have to find one way or another how you're going to finance all of this research.
Jordan, a small question about the problem. Which is the size of the problem that you want to tackle? If you can share some figures about
I give you a lot of numbers, Mary. I mean, it's a very, very big problem. In numeric terms, last year, $35 billion globally was spent on IVF. The number of IVF cycles doubles every 3 to 4 years as, the long tail, or rather the bell curve of median age of first-time parents shifts up. But I think the worst statistic of all, I speak to a lot of people who, my age, who considering having kids in the future or thinking about kids, and know that they're now at an age where maybe it's something to think about. And the comment I hear so often is, well, look, we can't have kids naturally. There's always IVF. What people don't tell you is 70% of couples who start an IVF journey will end that journey without a baby. That's horrendous. No other healthcare system has those kind of outcomes. No other system will result in that kind of ratio. And when you confront that ratio and you think about, okay, well, what does this mean? You've got two really significant implications. One, ultimately, it needs to improve, and the bar is really quite low for that improvement. And so it's a really kind of a pushing on an open door a little bit in terms of some of these technologies that are coming to market. But two, we do need to do a lot more about education. I think there's a huge education gap around fertility and fertility journeys, and actually what do odds look like, and what actually is your kind of likely to spend to get pregnant or to go through an IVF journey. What are your options, and how do those options change over time? Because ultimately, I think a lot of people are making decisions that are not well informed around, what the realities are, at least insofar as today is concerned. And that's leading to a lot of problems. And I think part of the reason why education is so bad is I think infertility and subfertility are one of the few remaining healthcare areas that have high degree of stigma. High degree of stigma because it affects young people who are not generally used to being open about healthcare conditions. Because generally speaking, young people are pretty healthy, and confronting the reality that you may not be able to have your own kids, and you've got all of these difficult decisions to make, and you're now having to grapple with your partner and figure out how you're going to align your new plans and expectations around the future. It's very difficult. People don't like talking about it and sharing it openly, and that leads to a lot of not much information being shared publicly, and then all of these misconceptions about how easy it might be able to get pregnant if you go down the ART routes. I know there's enough numbers for you, Mario, but it's a huge market, but it's also a huge problem, and the unmet need in fertility is massive.
And in terms of the value proposition, because we're going to extend the reproductive period, can you share some insights about for how long you are thinking that this is possible? Because now we say the 40s is the latest for a woman. Will you expect to reach the 50s, which is the challenge, to make it more practical for some people, because this is sometimes very technical?
We very much, when we talk about extending the reproductive window for women, specifically with eggs, we talk about extending it through and up to menopause. Ultimately, as you'll both know, all the eggs a woman has, she's born with, and essentially over the course of life, those eggs are each month used until you run out of your egg reserve, and then there's menopause. And that challenge of the ultimate egg reserve is not one we're tackling. What we're looking to do is women who still have eggs and still have menstrual periods, and can we actually improve the quality of those eggs so that they can get pregnant as though they were younger? And that's the really big gap. If you look at pregnancy outcomes in women who use donor eggs, so use very young eggs from young women, actually the outcomes look very similar from mid-20s through to 40s. Actually, the fertility decline is not a function of the ability to get pregnant or maintain a pregnancy. It's the egg quality itself that drops off, that then makes it very difficult to conceive. Really from late 30s onwards is when you really start to see the drop-off in outcomes.
Yeah, egg quality and non-viable pregnancies as well. Is your technology something that you're using in fresh eggs, let's say? Sound like I'm going to the supermarket. Or our frozen eggs, or both?
Yes. It's a great
I don't know what the medical term.
No, you're right. You're right. They are called fresh eggs, fresh or frozen. So theoretically, both. It doesn't make a difference from a delivery perspective. There are some technical advantages of working with fresh eggs, and I think the ambition is when we are on the market, this would be incorporated into fresh retrievals and fresh administration. But theoretically, both. It doesn't make a difference.
Which are the key factors to improve the quality of the eggs?
There's really one factor. People talk about egg quality. It's quite a nebulous term, and it's kind of bandied around. And there are some factors, but there's really just one huge one. One mega factor that when we talk about egg quality, we're really referring to. Before we get into that, it's probably worth caveating with just a few facts about the egg. The egg is by far the largest cell in the body, in a woman's body. And what that means is that it's a much more complicated cell because it means you've got all of these signaling pathways that now you have to travel a lot further, which means they're a lot less precise than you typically expect. Much bigger, and there's a lot more going on because ultimately it has to support this entire embryo development. The sperm only really contributes DNA, nothing else of material value to the embryo. And so you've got a very complicated cell, it's very large. It's also a very old cell, by far the oldest cell in a woman's body. And they survive decades before they may ever be used. Over that time, you do see some changes inside the egg. One of those changes, one of the most important changes, is the glue. It's a protein called cohesin complex that holds chromosomes together, is progressively and irreversibly lost. Now, this is really important because you'll appreciate every cell in your body will have maternal DNA and paternal DNA. And that's true of the egg. But before the egg can become an embryo, it needs to discard half of its DNA so that it's made space to receive the other half from the sperm. That happens really once in a subset of eggs, once a month with each cycle. A set of eggs will what's called undergo maturation. They will mature. What that really means, they remove half of their DNA. Older eggs, the glue that holds them together, progressively irreversibly lost. Big implication in that what happens is that these chromosomes that should neatly divide into 50-50 don't. They actually start to pair up or get pulled apart prematurely. And these chromosomes then just randomly distribute themselves either into the wastebasket or they stay in the egg. Eggs that have this problem are unviable, almost exclusively unviable. There are some exceptions where some versions lead to some congenital disorders but can lead to viable pregnancies. But for the most part, it manifests either no embryo arresting development at some point ex vivo, or first trimester miscarriage. And those are really what's undergoing. And that problem set rises exponentially from about 35 years of age. By 33, about half of eggs have this problem. By early 40s, it's about 95% plus. And it's a relatively short period of time where you have this change. And so what we're really trying to do when we think about equality is, okay, well, what can we do to prevent that from happening? And ensure the eggs just correctly put the correct number of chromosomes in the egg so that when fertilized, you have a healthy, viable embryo that can be transferred.
Can you repeat that again?
So the number of eggs that have this error, the wrong number of chromosomes remaining in the egg, the number or share of eggs have this problem. By 33, it's already half of eggs, which is not a huge problem because it means half of eggs are great. By the time you look at early 40s, it does vary by population and there are contributing factors. But broadly speaking, by early 40s, it's already reaching 90-95% plus. And at that point, it's why IVF is just not offered to patients in those groups because odds are just so low that you're going to reach an egg. Of course, it's possible, but it's so low.
Just in 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also why it's such a, as you've identified, Jordan, it's such a niche in the market because of all those other lifestyle factors. We're not having those conversations early. I certainly wasn't in a position in my early 30s to have a family, and I'm not uncommon in that. Like a lot of my friends, we either have children who are only, a year or two old, or they're now thinking about, okay, I need to start that journey and then facing these real life problems. On the stigma piece, you touched on that as well, and I think this is also a topic that I'd like to explore if you can, is that I think a lot of when this journey starts, whether it's through IVF or natural pregnancy, and there may be miscarriages or non-viable pregnancies, a lot of that comes back to the mother, and I think that the mother carries a lot of the burden on that. And I know I know some of my friends who've had difficult conversations with their partners who've then said, can you go and get tested? How does the work that you do or the team that you're working with help open the doors for those conversations as well, and the partnership that needs to happen there, reducing that stigma?
It's a fantastic point because I think it highlights really two problems. One, the stigma is real and we know it's real. And two, I think the lack of education around fertility leads to a lot of misaligned understanding of what's going on. And I'm going to maybe stand on my soapbox for one moment and say, I think one of the big challenges are that, okay, we know male factor fertility is declining. We know that there's a rising share of male subfertility that's associated with all kinds of external environmental factors, not all of which we understand. However, it's shocking to me how advanced women will go in terms of diagnostic procedures, often very invasive diagnostic procedures to identify potential causes for subfertility before a single sperm sample is collected and evaluated, which is it's shocking because one, the barrier to evaluation of sperm is very low in that you just need to collect a sample. It's not that invasive, and the tests are really quite good now. But two, actually, male factor subfertility are largely treatable. Not all of them, but the vast majority are, in that there are procedures in place where you can mostly get around spermatic disorders by actually just injecting the egg manually into the egg, which I think introduces two interesting points worth saying. I think one, we need to move on from this narrative that fertility is a women's health area. Something I feel very strongly about. It's not. It takes two people to have a child, and there are a whole bunch of conditions that do just pertain to women, and there's a whole bunch of conditions that just pertain to men. But it's fundamentally reproductive health is two people and affects both sexual systems. And so when I think about some of the challenges that we think about with stigma, I think a big part of the story is, well, we just need to be a bit more open about how common this is. 1 in 6 people will go through an infertility journey. I mean, and it's growing, first of all. It's extremely common. It's crazy to me how many times I tell people what I do, and they open up about they're going through IVF, or they tried, or they're planning, or they're saving up. But generally speaking, you would not otherwise know, and it's not something they feel comfortable sharing with other people. And two, even as we start to pull back the curtain on the stigma, we do need to do, I think, a bit of work in education around, let's just open up the market here and talk about all of the causes of infertility and making sure that we're doing the right investigations at the right time and realizing that it's not a blame game and it's not about understanding exactly where the source of the infertility or subfertility arises from. And actually a case of just trying to get the diagnosis as quickly as possible so that then the best choices can be made available to the patients and the physician can walk through, the options from there. But we're not going to start to begin to tackle this problem until we get more comfortable talking about infertility journeys.
Well, it's a very difficult topic because, couples nowadays, they don't talk that much, and we've seen that. You see the numbers, you see the problem. And I don't know if actually as a man, if with my friends, for example, we talk about this type of things, or if we are conscious that, actually we could be part of the problem too, right? You are at seed now, right? You raise a few millions. But I would like to get more into that. I hear that you have a board as well. How's the business running? In which stage you are from the biotech? Because I know that biotech is a different model. It's not like a normal tech startup, right? And where you spend a few years doing research, and then when you go to the lab, basically you create the treatment and then you supply it in the market. That's what I understand so far, how the biotech works. Can you talk a little bit about the fundraising? How much did you raise? Which stage is your startup now? How is that the regulation? And then a little bit about the board composition of your team.
Yeah, absolutely. So we as a company are 18 months, almost 2 years now actually of age. And it's been already such an incredible journey as we take different risks off the table as the company grows. Ultimately, when you're developing new treatments and therapeutics, the ultimate goal is authorization from agencies to market your product. Now, that is just problem set number one, because when you have authorization to market, as you both know, that doesn't mean that everyone is suddenly going to buy your products and all the rest of it. That's just permission to begin to sell. And so we think about the biotech journey very much in 2 stages. You have your R&D stage, which itself has preclinical and clinical stages, and then you have your post-commercial phase. You've got to launch this into the market and go through the highly regulated processes of selling into clinics. Now, in terms of where we are, really the focus for the first couple of years has been threefold. One, selecting and evaluating our lead candidate, which we've now done. It's called Livanta, where we look to resolve this chromosomal problem I spoke to you about earlier. The second is to start to generate some data around whether this works and what we can learn about its function inside the egg. We presented some very exciting data a couple of weeks ago at the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, where we showed an 84% reduction in this error type, albeit in our mouse studies, which is very exciting for us because what it does is it provides kind of a foundation and a baseline understanding that this is a solvable problem. For the first time, we can say with some confidence that actually we are able to prevent this serotype and our eggs of advanced maternal age actually to perform as though they were much younger. And the third piece ultimately is making sure that we're gearing up for these trials sensibly. So typical drugs, it's already hard enough, but you can usually control most of your risks by doing a very gradual clinical program. In our case, we're kind of jumping into the deep end very early in our program in that this clinical trial is going to involve pregnant women. That's significant because, of course, not only are you dealing with a patient, the woman who enrolled in the trial, suddenly there's almost a second patient in the mix because the baby who is going to be born on the other side of this journey will have been a part of this experiment, part of these studies, which places the bar very high in terms of what's required to provide the conviction and the confidence to regulators, to patients, to physicians, that we've done all of the homework around de-risking it maximally before you get to that stage. So that's very much where our head is at the moment and where our focus is, working very closely with clinics across the world in understanding where the evidence needs to be and how we get there with innovative trial design and study design. Because of course, again, when you think about this preclinical program, there's only so much we can do without actually going to pregnancy. And so that's really where our focus has been. We raised a bit of money last year to kind of take us on that journey and begin these portions of work. And as part of that fundraise, we built our board, which has been really a fantastic source of structural support. I've kind of experienced governance in different hats. I think you mentioned up top, Mario, I previously served as governor at Guy's and Thomas's, which is it's a complete different beast of an organization. And they do something like £1.2 billion in revenue a year. It's the largest NHS trust in the country, has multiple sites. It sees literally hundreds of thousands of patients a year. And so what that means from a governance from that organization and saying at that scale, how actually do you ensure a publicly owned and run organization is accountable and effective and meets expectations? And it's very different in a company of U-Ploid, where we're fewer than 10 people, and we have a lot of work to do and a lot of things that could distract us. But how actually do we ensure that we are running effectively, given that we're lean? And I think the board has been instrumental in supporting us do that.
Yeah, I think the stage that you're at in moving up to these trials, and the thought that comes to my mind as well, which I'm sure is one of the key things that your board asks, is how much of their investment, or is the investment is required in terms of insurance and managing risk when you are embarking on human trials?
Yeah, so I mean, biotech is a risk adjustment thesis. Every stage of the biotech, you're wanting to take some risk off the table, and that's really there. You're never going to be revenue generating until you get past your phase 3 clinical trial. That's a long way away, and probably hundreds of millions of pounds later. And so as you raise money in a biotech journey, what you're really trying to do is take sufficient risk off the table to justify further investment in the program. And really what's important is to kind of have the intellectual honesty to say, actually programs can die. And there can be very good reasons why you might kill a program. And what you're really trying to do is almost you start with a giant block of ice and you're just carving away at it until you end up with the final product you're getting at. And it may be that you're carving away and actually you notice there's a huge air bubble inside and you're not going to build what you're looking for because, i.e., it fails an efficacy study, or it fails something in the safety test, or it's toxic, or whatever it might be. And it's very important that you're peeling back the layers in the correct sequence to ensure that the next level of investment is justified. I think that's also where the board is incredibly helpful in helping us understand and think about actually what are the right layers of risk to take now and what are the right levels of risks to take next. And that's very much how we think about resource allocation, and then also justification for future raises. And then we think about getting all the way to the clinical trial. Actually, we want to be in a place where we've taken off the vast majority of risk off the table. We have really good conviction around the product and how it slots and how we design all of the components that go into that, such that investors are able to support a program with higher conviction. Of course, there's always new risk, and then of course at the other end you've got the market risk, which no doubt you meet tech companies all the time on your podcast, and you'll know the market risk is not to be trivialized. But that's really what biotech's all about, and our board has been extremely helpful in helping us understand how we sequence these.
Do you pick up every member of the board, or someone was allocated, I don't know, by the regulator How does it work?
All right. Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I think it's also worth saying that you have your governance board, purpose running the company and ensuring that, resources are being used correctly and rightly. But there's also other types of boards that we include. Advisory boards are crucial in these companies because actually the level of expertise required to bring a new treatment to market is vast. It's far vaster than something we could kind of build entirely in-house. So we've been incredibly lucky with some of the advisors who've kind of joined us on our journey very early on to provide us with kind of expertise in things we should be thinking about. Alison Campbell, world-leading professor in embryology, Mary Vincent, who's been in the clinical development program for a whole number of products in rare disease and cell therapies for decades. And so these types of expertise that we brought on our journey have been extremely helpful. And whilst they don't form the same roles as the company's board, actually the advisory board is almost as important, if not more, in terms of actually really understanding how we approach some of the sequential risks that we take off the table.
How long is it going to take you to get into the next stage, the next funding round, and which is the purpose of that funding round?
Yes, I mean, we've still got a lot of work on our side to do before the next funding round, and we're not going to rush the science. We're not going to rush. I mean, in fact, as a company, we're working in a very exciting space, in a space that can have quite serious implications for the future of fertility journeys. But we're also very cognizant that we do not want to be a hype company, and we do not want the expectations to exceed the data. And so we take this very seriously internally, that we do not move forward unless justified by the underlying evidence. And so we're not going to rush the next fundraise. We know there's things that we need to demonstrate before we are comfortable moving to the next stage of development. And so it will be when it will be. But yeah, I think that's very much the ethos of the company and how we think about growth.
Fantastic. And you talked about getting ready for the regulators and to go to market. Is that process something that is UK focused? Is it worldwide, pan-European? And how do you decide that?
It's a great question. I think regulators globally already have a degree of variation about how they think about preclinical studies, clinical studies, everything in between. But in reproduction, there's another level of complexity, which actually reproduction is separately legislated for and in most countries separately regulated. In the UK, we also have MHRA, which is responsible for evaluating all therapeutics and any medical device that might be launched in the UK. But we also have the HFEA, which is responsible for governing how ART, assisted reproductive technologies, are conducted and also monitoring all of the clinics that offer that care to patients. And this varies by every single country. And so we are kind of dealing with kind of two overlapping levels of regulatory compliance, which is right and it's correct for the space, given how sensitive this sector is. But it also means it's hyper variable between jurisdictions in terms of what is and isn't allowed and what is and isn't enabled for either research or for clinical practice. And so when we think about developing Livanto and moving the program forward, we instinctively think global, but we have to do so from a very, very culturally sensitive perspective to ensure that what we're doing is aligned with the expectations and frankly the laws of different countries. And I think we are extremely lucky to be in the UK. I think it's one of the more liberal and well-regulated environments for the types of research we're doing, because there's great governance in terms of the rules about what you can do and great compliance with those rules. And so we're very lucky to be here, and it's kind of been excellent for our growth so far.
Jordan, we are like heading to the end of the podcast. Which are like the key lessons learned that you will give to the audience, and also for people who are in the biotech industry that they are thinking to start this journey?
Where to start? I think everything takes longer than you think it would take. Everything is harder than you thought it would be. But ultimately, I think, certainly in biotech, I think we found that there are just some incredibly intelligent people out there who are able to think about the same problem from a very different perspective. And like being very open to bringing on expertise as and when kind of your development justifies has been instrumental for our own growth. And I'm thinking about our development. The other thing I would say is ultimately, particularly in biotech, where you're dealing with fundamentally new frontier of science. So there's embedded technological risk and uncertainty. There really is there's no downside to just kind of confronting that head on and really confronting these assumptions you're making and like just stress testing ideas until they break. You see that we're based in Oxford, and there's so many incredible companies coming out of the ecosystem. It's also true in Cambridge and in London. And we're starting to increasingly see these very exciting companies emerge with that kind of confidence and bravado that you have typically seen in the kind of broader tech sector. You're like, okay, well, we may fail, and actually, maybe this doesn't work out as we thought it would, but we're going to try. We're going to put everything into it. I think in biotech, that's certainly true in the UK at the moment. I mean, if you're considering something, or you've been working on something in your postdoc for the past 5 years, or your PhD, or whatever it might be, and you really think you might have something, I think you just kind of roll the dice and run with it, because if you don't, it's likely no one will.
Jordan, and I have just a final question. Given that people listening to this might be also on their own fertility journey, is there anything, with all this technology development, when do you think that these products might be coming onto market, whether through U-Ploid or through other competitors? If someone is in that moment where they're sort of struggling and they're listening to this thinking there's hope out there, but what is that potential timeline?
Yeah, I am instinctively nervous about ever providing timelines for these technologies. There's so much uncertainty in their development, and there's so much work to do. And whilst we are very excited about some of the data we're generating internally, that's not itself a surrogate for getting to the clinical trial and thinking about those studies. It's definitely not coming in the very short term. I think we still have years to go in development and thinking about bringing these products to market, and it's going to happen in a sequential step. And it's tough, because actually there aren't many great solutions to these challenges. I think you think about particularly the problem with egg quality. You've really got two options for women of advanced maternal age. Option one is you look at egg donors and the egg donor market, which in the US, for example, is very expensive. Option two is you invent a time machine, you go back in time and you freeze your eggs 20 years ago. I mean, and we've not yet invented a time machine. And I think when you consider this kind of hard reality facing patients who are going through an infertility journey, it can be very tempting to look at promising early stage research and data and think this is the savior, and this is where I should rely hope. And I'm very nervous about U-Ploid ever positioning itself in that category. We have a lot of work to do, and we are as optimistic as anyone that we can do it, but it will take time, and it will require the data to support where we're going. So I know it's not a very useful answer, but I think
I appreciate your honesty in that response, because I think that there would be people that sort of think, well, I'll just wait 12 months before I start, but then I think your message is really start now, like if you're thinking about it, because every month, every cycle, particularly from the female perspective, is an opportunity for a younger egg to happen.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Appreciate that. And I'm sure that our listeners will as well. But also, equally, I hope that U-Ploid and the work that you're doing does have those really positive outcomes. And in the futures, we can really see you having such a positive impact on life and the community.
You, me both.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Very good conversation. When I met Jordan, I think last year or early this year, when he talked about this topic, I said, "Are you seriously talking about this?" I understood well. He said, "No, yes, I'm doing this." So I found it fantastic. And then because of life, we've been, having a few conversations, and that's why I decided to say, it should be nice to have him in the podcast, because it's such a good value proposition, not only from the business perspective, also how you are going to help not just women, but also couples, right? To make that dream true. Thank you so much both again. I will see you in the future. We are going to be excited to talk to you in the future too, Jordan, to see how you are in your journey. And have a great weekend.
Thank you very much for having me, and have a great weekend too.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao. That's all for today's episode. A big thank you to our guests for sharing their journey and insights. If you enjoyed this conversation, follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or LinkedIn to stay connected with our upcoming episodes. I'm Mario Rivas with Tiffany Shown. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.